The piercing cries of newborn twins echoed through the modest cabin as Willow Bennett clutched both infants to her chest, her face pale with exhaustion but her eyes bright with fierce love. It was 1878 in the harsh territory of Wyoming, and she had just become both a mother and a widow in the span of 24 hours. "2 mouths to feed and no husband to help," muttered Mrs. Hodgkins, the midwife who had delivered the babies through Willow's grueling 18-hour labor. The older woman shook her head as she cleaned her hands in a basin of water. "The good Lord tests some of us more than others." Willow gazed down at her son and daughter, their tiny faces scrunched and red. "We'll manage," she whispered, though uncertainty gnawed at her insides. Just 3 days ago, her husband Thomas had been thrown from his horse while rounding up cattle on the neighboring ranch where he worked. His neck had snapped instantly, leaving Willow alone in their remote cabin with twins on the way and winter approaching. "Managing is one thing, surviving is another," Mrs. Hodgkins replied, her tone softening slightly as she regarded the young mother. 22 years old with 2 newborns and no family within 500 miles, it's not right." Willow's chin lifted slightly. "My babies and I will be just fine." Mrs. Hodgkins sighed. "I'll speak with Reverend Phillips. Perhaps the church can arrange something. You can't stay out here alone." After the midwife left, Willow allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall freely. She had come west with Thomas 2 years earlier, full of dreams about building a life together. They had saved every penny toward buying their own small ranch someday. Now those dreams lay shattered around her, as fragile as the new lives she held in her arms. "I promise you both," she whispered to her sleeping infants, "I will find a way." The following weeks proved harder than Willow could have imagined. The twins, she named them Hannah and Henry, had different schedules and temperaments. When one slept, the other cried. She managed just 2 or 3 hours of sleep each night, snatched in fragments between feedings. News of her situation spread through the small town of Prosperity, 10 miles from her cabin. The church ladies took turns bringing food and offering assistance, though their help came with an abundance of opinions. "You ought to give them up," Mrs. Peterson said bluntly one afternoon as she delivered a pot of stew. The woman was the banker's wife and considered herself the voice of practical wisdom in town. "There's a nice orphanage in Cheyenne. They'd have a proper chance there." "I will not abandon my children," Willow replied, her voice low but firm as she nursed Henry while rocking Hannah's cradle with her foot. "It's not abandonment, it's common sense," Mrs. Peterson insisted. "1 baby is difficult enough for a widow, 2 is impossible. You're being selfish, keeping them when you can barely feed yourself." After Mrs. Peterson left, Willow looked around the small cabin that suddenly seemed impossibly confining. The winter had been brutal, and spring hadn't brought much relief. Their meager savings were dwindling rapidly. She had tried sewing for extra money, but caring for the twins left her little time for other work. 2 days later, Reverend Phillips arrived with his wife. They sat awkwardly at Willow's small table while she tried to quiet both crying babies. "Mrs. Bennett," the Reverend began, clearing his throat, "the church council has discussed your situation." Willow's arms tightened around her 3-month-old twins. "We've arranged for you to stay with the Carters in town. They have a room above their store you can use. Mrs. Carter can help with the babies while you work in their shop." "That's very kind," Willow said cautiously. The Reverend's wife spoke up. "There is one condition. The Carters can only accommodate 1 child. Willow's heart froze. 1 child. "We've found a good Christian family in Laramie willing to take the other baby," Mrs. Phillips explained. "They lost their infant last year and are eager to adopt." "You want me to give up one of my children?" Willow's voice trembled. "It's for the best," Reverend Phillips said gently. 2 babies are too much of a burden for a lone woman. This way both children will be properly cared for." "No," Willow stood up, clutching both babies. "No, I won't separate them. They're all I have left of Thomas." "Mrs. Bennett, be reasonable," the Reverend's wife pleaded. "You can't possibly manage on your own. The children will suffer." "Then I'll find another way," Willow insisted. After they left, Willow paced the floor, her mind racing. She knew the Reverend meant well, but she couldn't bear the thought of giving up either Hannah or Henry. They were twins, they belonged together with her. The next morning, she packed what she could into Thomas's old saddlebag. She had decided to travel to Laramie, where her husband's cousin lived. Thomas had mentioned him a few times, a shopkeeper who might be willing to give her work. It was a desperate plan, but she saw no alternative. She fashioned a sling that allowed her to carry both babies against her chest, leaving her hands free to lead their old mare, Penny. As she closed the cabin door behind her, she felt a mixture of fear and determination. The journey would take several days, but she had no choice. By midday, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and a cold wind whipped across the open prairie. Willow pulled her shawl tighter around the babies and pressed on. When the rain began, she took shelter beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, trying to keep the twins dry. The rain showed no signs of letting up as evening approached. Willow was cold, wet, and increasingly desperate. The twins were fussing, hungry, and uncomfortable. She needed to find better shelter before nightfall. In the distance, she spotted smoke rising from a chimney. Hope surged within her as she urged Penny forward through the mud. As they drew closer, she could make out a small ranch house with a barn and corral. Light glowed from the windows, promising warmth and safety. Willow hesitated at the gate. She had no idea who lived here or whether they would welcome strangers, but with night falling and the rain turning to sleet, she had little choice. She led Penny toward the house and knocked on the door, the twins wailing against her chest. The door swung open to reveal a tall man with broad shoulders. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but his blue eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat. He looked about 30, with dark blonde hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Madam," he said, his gaze moving from her face to the two infants strapped to her chest. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Willow said, her voice nearly lost in a gust of wind. "I was hoping for shelter from the storm." "Just for the night. My babies and I, come in," he interrupted, stepping back to make way. "You're soaked through." Willow stumbled inside, relief washing over her as warmth from the fireplace enveloped them. The twins quieted slightly, sensing the change in temperature. "Thank you," she breathed. "I'm Willow Bennett. These are my children, Hannah and Henry." "Caleb Thornton," he replied, helping her remove her wet shawl. "Sit by the fire, I'll make some coffee." As Willow settled into a chair near the hearth, she took in her surroundings. The house was simple but clean and well kept. A bookshelf lined one wall, surprisingly full for a ranch house. The furniture was sturdy and practical. Caleb returned with a steaming cup, which she accepted gratefully. "Where are you headed in this weather?" he asked, his eyes curious but not intrusive. "Laramie," she replied. "I have family there." The half-truth tasted bitter on her tongue. Caleb nodded, not pressing further. "That's a long journey with two little ones." "We're managing," Willow said automatically. "I can see that." A smile touched his lips. "They look healthy and strong." Willow blinked back unexpected tears. After weeks of hearing how impossible her situation was, his simple observation felt like a gift. "Are you hungry?" he asked, already moving toward the stove. "You don't need to. I was about to eat anyway," he assured her. "There's plenty." While Caleb prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, Willow fed the twins. She was acutely aware of how vulnerable she must appear, a bedraggled woman with two infants seeking shelter from strangers. Yet Caleb's manner remained respectful and unassuming. "You have a beautiful ranch," she commented, trying to establish some normalcy. "It's small, but it's mine," he replied with evident pride. "Bought it 3 years ago, been building it up since. You're here alone, just me and the cattle." "And Rusty?" He nodded toward an old cattle dog sleeping by the fire. "Had a ranch hand, but he moved on last month. Haven't found a replacement yet." They ate in comfortable silence, interrupted only by the occasional whimper from one of the twins. After dinner, Caleb showed her to a small bedroom. "You can sleep here," he said. "I'll take the chair by the fire." "I couldn't possibly, Madam Willow," he corrected himself. "You've got 2 babies to care for, you need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Willow thanked him and settled the twins on the bed, creating a barrier of pillows to keep them from rolling off. She lay down beside them, listening to the rain against the window and the occasional creak of the chair as Caleb moved in the other room. For the first time in months, she slept deeply and without interruption. Morning brought clear skies and a difficult decision. Caleb had already been up for hours, tending to his cattle and preparing breakfast when Willow emerged from the bedroom with the twins. "The road to Laramie will be muddy," he observed, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Might be better to wait another day," Willow hesitated. "I've imposed enough already." "It's no imposition," Caleb assured her. "Truth is, it's nice having company." She studied him, trying to discern his intentions. There was nothing in his manner that suggested anything improper. If anything, he seemed genuinely pleased to have guests. "One more day," she agreed finally. "I can help around the house to earn our keep," Caleb smiled. "Deal." That day set a pattern that would continue for the next week. Each morning, Willow would announce her intention to leave, and each time, Caleb would point out some practical reason to delay muddy roads, reports of bandits, a broken wheel on her cart that needed fixing. In truth, Willow was grateful for the excuses. The twins were thriving in the stable environment. For the first time since their birth, they were settling into a regular routine. Hannah, always the more vocal of the two, had even begun to smile at Caleb when he made funny faces at her. Willow helped with cooking and household chores while Caleb worked his ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking long after the twins had fallen asleep. She learned that he had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, determined to build something of his own. He had worked cattle drives and saved every penny until he could afford his small spread. "What about you?" he asked one evening. "What really brings you to these parts?" Willow hesitated, then decided to trust him with the truth. She told him about Thomas's death, the dwindling resources, and finally, the ultimatum from the town. "They wanted me to give up one of my babies," she concluded, tears welling in her eyes. "Said I was being selfish and stubborn for keeping both." That twins were too much of a burden for a widow with no family. Caleb's expression darkened. "That's not right." "I know there's no real family in Laramie," she admitted. "Just a distant cousin of my husband's who might not even remember us, but I had to try something. I couldn't separate my children." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "You're welcome to stay here," he said finally, "as long as you need." "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," he interrupted gently. "This place is too big for just me, and I could use the help." Willow studied him carefully. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Thornton?" "A practical arrangement," he said simply. "You need a safe place for you and your children. I need help running this ranch. You can stay in the spare room, help with cooking and such. In return, you have a roof over your heads and food on the table." "And what would people say about such an arrangement?" Caleb shrugged. "Not much to say. You'd be my housekeeper. Nothing improper about that." It was a sensible solution, yet Willow hesitated. She had learned to be wary of seemingly simple offers, and if it doesn't work out, "Then I'll help you get to wherever you want to go," he promised. No questions asked. After considering his offer carefully, Willow agreed to stay through the summer. She wrote to Reverend Phillips, informing him of her new position as housekeeper at the Thornton Ranch. His reply was predictably disapproving, but she refused to be swayed. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Caleb was gone most days, tending to his cattle and land, while Willow managed the house and cared for the twins. In the evenings, they would share dinner and conversation. Sometimes Caleb would read aloud from one of his books while Willow mended clothes or knitted. As the twins grew, they became more active and engaging. Henry was determined to crawl before his time, constantly pushing himself up on his arms. Hannah was more verbal, babbling constantly as if carrying on important conversations. Caleb took a particular delight in the babies. Despite his large, calloused hands, he was gentle when holding them. He carved wooden toys for them and fashioned a rocking cradle large enough for both. "You're good with them," Willow observed one evening as Caleb bounced Henry on his knee. He smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Always wanted a family of my own." "You never married." "Almost did. Back east before the war." He didn't elaborate, and Willow didn't press. As summer progressed, Willow began venturing beyond household chores. She started a vegetable garden beside the house, planted flowers near the porch, and even learned to milk the 2 cows Caleb kept for household use. "You've made this place a home," Caleb commented one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The twins were asleep inside, giving the adults a rare moment of peace. "It was a home before," Willow replied, "just needed a woman's touch." "And children's laughter," he added quietly. Their eyes met briefly before both looked away. Willow was acutely aware of a shift in their relationship, something beyond the practical arrangement they had agreed upon. She found herself watching for Caleb's return each day, enjoying his deep laugh, and appreciating the way the sun had lightened streaks of his hair to gold. Yet she was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. She was still in mourning for Thomas, and Caleb was her employer, nothing more. The arrival of August brought scorching heat and increased work. Caleb was constantly busy with the ranch, often returning late and exhausted. Willow took on more responsibilities, determined to prove her worth. One particularly hot afternoon, she was hanging laundry while the twins napped inside when she noticed a rider approaching. As the figure drew closer, she recognized Mrs. Peterson from town, accompanied by Reverend Phillips. Anxiety knotted Willow's stomach as she greeted them. "This is unexpected. We were concerned about you," Reverend Phillips said, dismounting, "living out here unchaperoned with a single man." "Mr. Thornton is my employer," Willow stated firmly. "There's nothing improper about our arrangement." Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "So you say, but appearances matter, Mrs. Bennett. People are talking." "I don't much care what people are saying," Willow replied, her patience wearing thin. "We've come with an alternative," Reverend Phillips said. "The Whitman family in town has agreed to take you in. They have a position for you in their millinery shop." "That's very kind, but I'm happy with my current situation." "And the children?" Mrs. Peterson asked pointedly. "Are they thriving with this arrangement? 2 babies are still quite a burden for a working woman." Before Willow could respond, the twins began crying inside. She excused herself and hurried to tend to them. When she returned to the porch with a baby on each hip, she found Caleb had arrived home early and was speaking with the visitors. "Mr. Thornton," Reverend Phillips was saying, "surely you understand our concerns. A young widow living alone with an unmarried man, Mrs. Bennett, is my housekeeper," Caleb interrupted, his voice cool. "She has her own room, and I respect her completely." "Nevertheless, appearances, with all due respect, Reverend," Caleb said, "what Mrs. Bennett does is her own business. She's an excellent mother and housekeeper. The twins are healthy and happy here." Mrs. Peterson turned to Willow. "This is about the children, dear. 2 babies are simply too much for one woman to manage properly. The Whitmans are prepared to help you find a good home for one of them." Willow felt as if she'd been struck. "After all this time, you're still suggesting I give up one of my children. It's for the best," Mrs. Peterson insisted. "Even with Mr. Thornton's help, twins are an enormous burden. Then I'll carry all 3 of them," Caleb interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. A profound silence followed his words. Willow stared at him, hardly believing what she'd heard. Caleb stepped closer to Willow and the twins. "Mrs. Bennett and her children are not a burden. They're a blessing to this ranch and to me personally. I've been meaning to speak with her about making our arrangement more permanent." "More permanent," Reverend Phillips echoed. Caleb's eyes met Willow's, asking a silent question. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding flowing between them. "I intend to ask Mrs. Bennett to marry me," Caleb announced. "If she'll have me." Willow's heart pounded in her chest. This was not at all what they had discussed, yet she couldn't deny the rightness of it. Over the past months, Caleb had become not just her employer but her friend, her support, and increasingly, someone she cared for deeply. "This is rather sudden," the Reverend observed. "Not really," Caleb replied, still looking at Willow. "Some things you just know are right, Mrs. Peterson looked scandalized. "But what about your late husband? It's barely been a year. Thomas would have wanted his children to have a good father," Willow said quietly. "And me to have a good husband." After a few more uncomfortable exchanges, the visitors departed, clearly dissatisfied but unable to argue further. As their horses disappeared down the road, Willow turned to Caleb. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked directly. "Every word," he replied. Though I had planned to be more romantic about it, he took a deep breath. I love you, Willow. I love Hannah and Henry, too. I want us to be a family properly, honorably. When did you know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I started falling for you that first night, seeing how fiercely you protected your babies. He smiled, reaching out to touch Henry's cheek. But I knew for certain the morning I found you asleep in the rocking chair with both twins on your chest. You looked so beautiful, so right in this house. Willow's eyes filled with tears. I've been fighting my feelings for you. It seemed too soon after Thomas, too complicated with the twins. And now, she smiled through her tears. Now I think perhaps God sent us to your door that rainy night for a reason. Caleb took Hannah from her arms, cradling the baby girl with practiced ease. Is that a yes? It's a yes, Willow confirmed. But are you certain? Taking on a ready-made family, I've never been more certain of anything, he assured her. The four of us belong together. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher. Mrs. Hodgkins, who had delivered the twins, stood as Willow's witness, while Caleb's nearest neighbor served as his. The twins, now 7 months old, were dressed in their finest clothes and behaved remarkably well throughout the ceremony. Married life brought changes to the ranch. Caleb moved his things into the main bedroom, and the spare room became a proper nursery for the twins. Willow was no longer just the housekeeper but the mistress of the ranch, making decisions about improvements and expansions. As autumn approached, they added a larger front porch to the house and began construction on an additional room. Caleb's cattle business was thriving, and with Willow's careful management of their finances, they were able to hire a ranch hand to help with the increasing workload. One evening in late September, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset, Hannah took her first steps, toddling unsteadily from Willow to Caleb. Henry, not to be outdone, pulled himself up on Caleb's knee and attempted to follow his sister, managing 2 wobbly steps before plopping down on his bottom. "Did you see that?" Caleb exclaimed, his face alight with pride. "They're walking," Willow laughed. "Heaven help us now. We'll need eyes in the back of our heads." Caleb gathered both babies into his arms, tickling them until they squealed with delight. "I can't imagine life without these 2 little rascals," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "or without you." Willow leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "A year ago, I thought my life was over when Thomas died. I never imagined I could be this happy again." "I've been thinking," Caleb said, shifting Hannah to his other knee, "maybe we should visit town more often. Show everyone how well the twins are doing, how wrong they were about them being a burden," Willow smiled. "I'd like that, though I don't hold any grudges. In a way, their disapproval led me here to you. True enough." He kissed the top of her head. "Still, I wouldn't mind seeing Mrs. Peterson's face when these 2 come running into church on Sunday." As autumn deepened into winter, the Thornton household prepared for their first Christmas together. Caleb cut a small pine tree from the foothills and set it up in the corner of the sitting room. Willow decorated it with ribbons, dried berries, and small wooden ornaments Caleb had carved. The twins, now toddling confidently and beginning to form words, were fascinated by the tree and had to be constantly redirected from pulling on its branches. "Twee," Hannah announced proudly, pointing at the decorated pine. "That's right, sweetheart," Willow confirmed, scooping her daughter up. "It's our Christmas tree." "Mine?" Henry asked, looking up at his mother with wide eyes. "Yes, yours too," Caleb assured him, lifting the boy onto his shoulders. "And look what I made for under the tree." He produced 2 small wooden horses, intricately carved and polished to a soft shine. The twins reached for them eagerly, their faces bright with wonder. "Caleb, they're beautiful," Willow exclaimed, admiring his craftsmanship. "Been working on them at night after you all were asleep," he admitted. "Wanted their first Christmas with me to be special." Willow's heart swelled. Every day, it seemed, she discovered new reasons to love this man who had opened his home and heart to her family. On Christmas Eve, they bundled up the twins and took the wagon into town for the service at the small church. It was their first appearance as a family since the wedding. and Willow couldn't help feeling a touch of vindication as they entered the church with healthy, happy twins and a devoted husband, Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows shot up when she saw them, but to her credit, she approached after the service with a more genuine smile than Willow had ever seen from her. "The children look wonderful," she acknowledged. "And you seem well, Mrs. Thornton." "Very well, thank you," Willow replied, surprised by the use of her new name. "Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment," the older woman admitted. "It seems you found your way after all." Reverend Phillips and his wife also greeted them warmly, cooing over the twins and remarking on how much they'd grown. If there was any lingering disapproval of how quickly Willow had remarried, it wasn't apparent in their manner. As they drove home through the clear, cold night, Willow felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. The twins were asleep in their laps, exhausted from the excitement. "Happy?" Caleb asked, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his solid warmth. "Though I do have something to tell you," he glanced at her curiously. "Oh," Willow took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Come June, the twins will have a little brother or sister." Caleb's face transformed with wonder and joy. "Truly," he whispered. She nodded, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "I'm certain." He let out a whoop that startled the horses, then quickly apologized, glancing down at the still sleeping twins. "A baby," he marveled. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Willow asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it," he assured her, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own, and now—" He gestured to the sleeping twins and then to her stomach. "I'm the richest man in Wyoming territory." The winter passed in a flurry of activity. Caleb expanded the nursery to accommodate the coming baby and hired an additional ranch hand so he could spend more time at home. Willow's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she tired more easily than she had with the twins. Hannah and Henry celebrated their first birthday in February with a small party that included their nearest neighbors and the midwife, Mrs. Hodgkins. The twins were walking steadily now and beginning to string words together into simple sentences. Henry had Caleb's quiet thoughtfulness, while Hannah displayed Willow's determination and curiosity. "Hard to believe they were ever considered a burden, Mrs. Hodgkins remarked as she watched the twins playing with their new toys. "They're thriving beautifully. They just needed stability and love," Willow replied, resting a hand on her growing belly, "and a father who adores them." As spring arrived, bringing new calves to the ranch and fresh growth to Willow's garden, the family settled into increasingly domestic contentment. Caleb had proven to be not just a good provider, but a devoted father and husband. He read to the twins every night, taught them the names of animals and plants, and never seemed to tire of their endless questions and energy. "I never thought I could love anyone as much as I loved Thomas," Willow confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the twins chase fireflies in the yard. "But what I feel for you is different, deeper somehow." Caleb took her hand, his thumb gently caressing her wedding ring. "Different seasons of life bring different kinds of love," he said thoughtfully. "What you had with Thomas was real and precious. What we have is its own kind of miracle." "How did you get so wise?" she teased, leaning against him. "Lots of quiet nights alone with my thoughts before you and these little tornadoes came into my life," he replied with a grin, nodding toward the twins. On a warm June morning, Willow went into labor. Caleb rode for Mrs. Hodgkins while the neighbor's wife came to watch the twins. Unlike the difficult birth of the twins, this labor progressed quickly and smoothly. By mid-afternoon, Willow held their daughter in her arms, a robust baby girl with a dusting of dark hair and Caleb's blue eyes. "Charlotte," Willow whispered, looking up at Caleb who sat beside her, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "After your mother, Charlotte," he agreed, gently touching the baby's tiny fist that had escaped from her blanket. "She's perfect." The twins were brought in to meet their new sister, approaching the bed with unusual solemnity. Hannah immediately declared the baby pretty, while Henry seemed more interested in how small her fingers were. "Baby sister," Hannah announced proudly. "That's right," Caleb confirmed, lifting her onto the bed for a better look. "This is Charlotte, your baby sister." "Charlotte," Henry attempted, climbing up to join them. Mrs. Hodgkins watched from the doorway, smiling at the family tableau. "If anyone had told me last year that those twins would be part of such a happy family, I might not have believed it," she admitted. "But seeing you all together, it's clear as day this is exactly how it should be." As summer turned to fall and Charlotte grew into a smiling, cooing baby, the Thornton ranch prospered. Caleb's careful management had increased his herd significantly, and Willow's garden produced enough vegetables to sell the excess in town. They added 2 more rooms to the house and built a proper barn to replace the older, smaller structure. On the anniversary of their wedding, Caleb surprised Willow with a proper gold wedding band to replace the simple band he'd given her for their hasty ceremony. "I promised you a better ring when we could afford it," he reminded her as he slipped it onto her finger. "Though no ring could possibly be worthy of all you've given me." Willow admired the delicate band with its small diamond. "It's beautiful," she breathed, "but unnecessary. I would have been happy with a string around my finger as long as it meant I was your wife." "I know," he said, kissing her softly. "That's why you deserve the best I can give you." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire, Caleb's arm around Willow's shoulders. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" she asked. "If I hadn't shown up at your door that night," Caleb considered the question. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens," he said finally. "But I do know I was lonely before you came. The ranch was just a place. Now it's a home." "I was so afraid," Willow admitted. "Terrified of failing the twins, of being unable to care for them properly, when everyone kept saying they were too much of a burden." "They were wrong," Caleb stated firmly. "Dead wrong. Those children are a gift, Charlotte too." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "And you, Willow Thornton, are the strongest, most capable woman I've ever known." She leaned up to kiss him, her heart full of gratitude and love. "Thank you for seeing what I could be when all I could see was what I'd lost." "I just saw the truth," he replied simply. As the years passed, the Thornton family continued to grow and thrive. Hannah and Henry started school in town, riding in together on a gentle pony Caleb had trained specially for them. Charlotte, with her father's blue eyes and quiet demeanor, followed her older siblings everywhere, determined not to be left out. 2 years after Charlotte's birth, Willow gave birth to another son, whom they named William. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter they called Emma. The house expanded accordingly, with Caleb adding rooms as needed and eventually building a second story to accommodate their growing brood. The ranch prospered as well. With careful investment and hard work, Caleb was able to purchase adjacent land, increasing their holdings and their herd. They hired more hands, built additional outbuildings, and became one of the most successful operations in the county. Willow never forgot those early dark days after Thomas's death, when she'd felt so alone and overwhelmed. Sometimes, when watching her 5 children playing in the yard or gathered around the dinner table, she would remember Mrs. Peterson's words. 2 babies are simply too much of a burden. How wrong she had been. The twins, now 10 years old, were the pride of their school. Hannah showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and reading, while Henry had inherited his father's way with animals and spent every spare moment helping with the ranch. One evening, as Willow stood on the porch watching Caleb teaching the twins to rope Charlotte, William and Emma clamoring for their turns, she felt a wave of profound gratitude wash over her. The path had not been easy, but it had led her here, to this family, this life, this love. Caleb looked up and caught her watching. He handed the rope to Henry and crossed the yard to join her on the porch. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about burdens," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "And how what seems heaviest can turn out to be your greatest blessing." He followed her gaze to their children, the twins who had once been considered too much for a widow to handle, Charlotte, who had cemented their new family, William and Emma, who had completed it. "I remember that day when Mrs. Peterson and the Reverend came," he said softly. "Trying to convince you to give up one of the twins, I was so angry I could barely see straight. That's when you said you'd carry all 3 of us," Willow remembered, smiling at the memory. "Best offer I ever made," Caleb declared, pulling her closer. "Though I didn't realize at the time just how many I'd end up carrying," Willow laughed. "5 children, a ranch, and a wife with opinions. Quite a load for one man." "Not a load," he corrected gently. "A life, our life." He kissed her temple, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant orange and gold, the Thornton family gathered on the porch of the home they had built together. The twins, once considered an impossible burden for a widowed mother, now stood tall and strong beside the man who had chosen to love them as his own. And Willow, who had once faced the darkest hour of her life alone, now stood surrounded by the family that had been born from courage, determination, and unexpected love. "Neither would I," she whispered, her heart full beyond measure. "Neither would I."